I am Norah Dunbar. I'm a professor of communication at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So it is now almost 8 o'clock in the evening here. And I came from dinner, which is why I was late. I'm sorry. I got the time wrong. But what I want to talk to you about today is a little bit of my research. So I'm a researcher in communication and interpersonal communication and nonverbal communication. And I'm interested in how people synchronize their behavior with the people that they are around. So I think that this has relevance to pedagogy. I'm going to talk to you. I know this is a conference on people interested in teaching and pedagogy. And so I'm going to try and relate my research in interpersonal communication to what y'all are interested in terms of nonverbal communication. So, nonverbal synchrony is the study of how people enmesh their behaviors with another person. So, when you are thinking about how you communicate with other people, you might think about how you kind of connect your behavior with theirs. So, you might think about, if you're talking with someone who's a fast talker, right? I'm kind of a fast talker. I'm from Canada. It's like northern US and southern Canada kind of rate of speaking. It's very fast. And so when I'm talking with someone from the southern United States, which is very slow, and they have what we call a drawl, they talk much slower. It's very awkward if I'm talking fast and they're talking slow. And what happens is you converge your speech rate with the person that you're talking to. So if you're a fast talker talking to a slow talker, you try and converge so that you meet in the middle. It could be things like vocal intensity. So how much, strain or pause there is in your voice. You might talk about your gestures, your whether if you're like a gestural person. If I'm from Italy, I gesture very broadly. Whereas if I'm from Japan, I'm going to be more restrained and not very gestural. So your culture plays a big role in how much is sort of natural for you. But you're going to want to converge those behaviors with the person that you're talking with. So it could be gesture, it could be gaze, it could be your facial affect, it could be how much you self disclose or your linguistics. Um, so if I'm using very formal language, then the person I'm speaking to will probably reciprocate with more formal language as well. Or I've also studied it with very just general ratings, like how synchronized are these two people, and not looking at particular behaviors in and of themselves. Several years ago, I wrote a review of interpersonal synchrony with Judy Burgoon and Howard Giles, who are giants in the fields of studying people who synchronize and reciprocate each other. And we really saw some sort of different sort of behaviors. So, what some people call mirroring or matching or complementarity, which basically means two people are meshing their behavior together as much as possible. Compensation and reciprocity are kind of the opposite of that. It means maybe I'm a fast talker and you're a slow talker. You might slow down even more in order to get me to slow down because you're trying to reciprocate or compensate actually for what I'm doing. And so, one way to make me slow down is for you to slow down even more. We call this either convergence or divergence. So basically, the actors are either moving toward each other or they're separating each other. And sometimes you diverge on purpose. If you really don't want to be associated with someone, you might be like, oh, I'm not like them. I'm going to do the exact opposite of whatever they do. And that's divergence. Whereas convergence is when you're trying to build rapport and you connection and you try and connect with people, then you want your behaviors to converge with them. Interpersonal synchrony is sort of like the overall reciprocity of your communication. Bernier and Rosenthal many years ago said that there were three components to interpersonal synchrony: simultaneous movement, rhythm, and what they called the smooth meshing of interaction. So sort of bringing all of these different nonverbal behaviors together in order to sort of create a synchronized, harmonious kind of relationship. There's two different kinds of synchrony. There's really what we call simultaneous synchrony or what we call concatenous synchrony. And simultaneous synchrony is when everybody's responding to the same thing. So say you're teaching a class and the professor tells a joke. The whole classroom laughs at once. They're doing this simultaneously, and they're usually responding to something outside of them. Concatenous synchrony is more like a sequential kind of thing. So if I do something and then my partner responds with that same thing, like maybe I laugh and then they laugh, but we're not laughing at the same time, that would be what we call concatenous synchrony. So synchrony that follows in a sequence. When we see synchrony in interpersonal behavior, it's typically a very positive thing. It creates a feeling of rapport, mutual attentiveness, positivity, and coordination between us. Sometimes it even results in something like developmental outcomes for children. So if children are well synchronized with their parents, they develop quicker, they respond better, they learn how to, enmesh themselves with the people around them a little bit better. If I'm working on a group project or a team project, then the more synchronized our group is, the better our task outcomes, the better we perform on our task. If I'm talking about a patient talking with a therapist, the more enmeshed the patient and the therapist are, the more they're synchronized in their behaviors, the better outcomes they have in therapy. There are many, many research studies that show that synchrony is a positive thing, that the more we can create synchrony and enmesh ourselves with the people that we're trying to communicate with, the better. This research study by Kurtz and Aljo in 2017 said that one of the important parts of synchrony is what they called shared laughter. Shared laughter creates a positive relationship together. And it, as opposed to unshared laughter, which is basically the opposite of what we're talking about. So shared laughter means we're laughing together. We're laughing with people. But if you're laughing at someone, not with them, then that's not the shared laughter. That's not the positive experience. So the more you have shared laughter, that you're laughing together about something, the more that boosts that sense of connection, the more you have that positive emotion, the more you see your partner as similar to you, and the more satisfied you are with your relationship. And this takes place in the classroom too. This research study by Kent that was published in Mind, Brain, and Education talked about the concept of flow, which is a term introduced by Csikszentmihalyi, who described an individual's enhanced state when inspired by a task. So they really talk about the difference between challenge and boredom. In a classroom, you really want your classroom dynamic to be characterized by people engaged so that they're not bored, but not so challenged that they feel overwhelmed. There's sort of like a happy medium in between those things that really heightens their focus and effortlessness and reduces their boredom. Kent talked about this idea in the classroom as being dynamic synchronization, that you want your class to move toward this experience together, that you're really in this state of flow as a whole, as a classroom. And that might include teacher to student relationships, student to student relationships, teachers to the class, maybe a student talking to the class. All these different relationships exist in a classroom, and all of them, we really want to see this sense of synchrony and rapport and connection and flow going on in the class. This study by Dicker et al. In 2017 talked about how brain-to-brain synchrony, they actually had people in class wearing EEG mesh hats that has all the sensors that mark all the different parts of your brain. And so you can see in this diagram from their study that they had all these students sitting around listening to a teacher, and they had all their EEG mesh hats on to show that they were connecting all of these different brains together. And they found that the extent to which brain activity amongst these students are synchronized predicts both student class engagement and their social dynamics within the class. So the more you can sort of get all these people on the same page, the more you can get them all synchronized together, the better the whole classroom is going to function. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of studies that I've done with nonverbal synchrony and trying to measure it and trying to exploit it. And these are mostly in interpersonal situations because that's the kind of research that I do. But at the end, I'm going to talk to you about how this might relate to your pedagogical issues and the fact that we might have these sort of synchronization questions as we continue um, through the data sets that we're talking about. So this is a secondary analysis from a study that I did in 2010 with Abra and Dunbar and Banis, who's one of your keynote speakers that spoke earlier today. We did this experiment where we basically took participants in a dyadic interaction, and they were experimentally manipulated to either be in low, equal, or high levels of power. We had 150 participants in our study, and they interacted with a problem about the desert survival task. Maybe you've heard of this problem before. The problem basically says your Jeep has crashed in the desert and you're stranded. There are a number of items in your Jeep. Which items are you going to salvage? And then we ask them to communicate with each other about which items they would want to salvage. So things are like a bottle of water, a map, a rear view mirror, a flashlight, these kinds of things. Then we gave them different levels of power. We said, you're the leader, you're in charge, you're the high power person. Or we said, that person's the leader, you're the low power person. So we experimentally manipulated their power as they were talking through the DSP. And then we gave them pre and post interaction rankings. So before they met with their partner, we asked them to rank the 12 items on the DSP, the flashlight, the rearview mirror, the map, the bottle of water, all these things. And then after they talked with their partner, we asked them to rank again. And we coded how they talked with their partner on this humor coding scheme. We looked at whether or not they used more positive humor. Did they disagree or compliment themselves or use self-disparaging humor or what we call bonding humor? So all these different kinds of humor that are basically meant to create a connection with your partner. You know, you might say, oh, I don't disagree with you, but, you know, maybe I'm just an idiot. You know, you make jokes about yourself, self-deprecating, in order to bond with your partner. Or you could take a different tactic, which is to use what we call negative humor. You put down your partner, you know, you say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, or you disparage the task, like what a stupid task this is. Like, I can't believe they're giving us a rearview mirror. Why is that even on the list? That's a stupid thing. Or there's sort of general humor that we coded as things that are like light humor, tension release, nonverbal humor, like making a funny face, laughing along with the partner, or other humor. I want to talk more to you about this whole idea of laughing along, because we never had that in our coding scheme to begin with. It was not something that we anticipated to see, but we asked people to code the different kinds of humor that they saw in these interactions. And anything that they didn't see in our coding scheme, they coded as other. And I said, okay, let's look at all these others. And boy, a lot of them were this idea of laughing along. So we redid our coding scheme and added this idea of laughing along with the partner. We found that of the humorous utterances that we observed in these desert survival interactions, there were over 1,200 of them across our 150 dyads, about 8 per interaction. So every time they met with someone to have to talk about the desert survival problem, they used humor about 8 times. Only 10 interactions had no humor at all. So of the 150, almost all of them had some humor in there at all. And the majority of the humor was from 5 different types. Laughing along with the partner, which we didn't even have in our original coding scheme, turned out to be the most common type of humor. Light humor, so sort of making a quick joke or like a little quip, was pretty common. Humor meant to disagree. So I disagree with you. I don't think the flashlight should be rated number 1, but I'm going to make a joke about it so that it doesn't sound so offensive if I disagree with you. Bonding humor, self-disparaging humor, And most of the other kinds of humor was used very rarely. Negative humor was almost used not hardly at all. So we were wondering about this laughing along with the partner. What is that about? And let's delve into that a little bit more. I'm going to show you a quick sample of what this looks like. This is two participants with a split screen. So they have two cameras on each other, and we've melded them together so you can see them both from the front. And they're here to communicate about the desert survival problem. They get instructions from the person in charge, the researcher, and then they start their conversation. Hopefully you can hear it. They're smiling at each other. A little bit of laughing there.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're supposed to hear what they're saying?
Oh, you can't hear it?
We cannot hear anything here.
Okay. Very sorry. What you were supposed to hear in the video is them basically like one person will make a suggestion. So they're talking about the desert survival problem, right? And one of them will say, I think we should head toward the outpost and see if we can find our way there. And the other one says, no, I think we should camp out and wait to be rescued. So those are two very different strategies. And one of them will say something like, oh, I rated the flashlight number 5. And the other one will go, oh, me too. And they both laugh. Not objectively funny. There's nothing funny about that, but they're using laughing really as a bonding experience. And so they're trying to explain, that, oh, I disagree with you, but I rank this the same. Isn't that funny? Ha 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 ha. And several times during each interaction, they use this laughing along to sort of, create a bond, even though they weren't actually laughing at anything that was objectively funny. There was no joke. There was nothing really funny about that, but they still smiled at each other and laughed. Hopefully, even though you couldn't hear what they were saying, you can still see that those two participants were really looking at each other and laughing and smiling. They were trying to be friendly. They were two strangers trying to solve this desert survival problem together. And what we found was that most of the dyads, 77%, used laughing along as a strategy. That's quite a lot. Like I said, they weren't laughing at anything objectively funny. This was just them trying to explain to each other what their rankings were on this desert survival task. It's a pretty dry task, but they use laughing along as kind of a way to create this bond with each other. In fact, it was used pretty often, almost 3 times per interaction. Females used it more than males. The females used it almost twice as much as the males, which we found a little bit interesting, that they would use that more as a bond than the males. But even despite this sex difference, it was still interesting to us that this is how they were kind of connecting with a stranger as they were trying to work through this desert survival task. We did another study where we were interested in looking at people's cheating behaviors. So in this case, what we did was we had people come together to play a trivia game with a Confederate. So the Confederate tries to encourage them to cheat. The trivia game was just like, here are 12 questions, and can you get as many of these right as you want? We left a laptop in the room with them, and the Confederate would say, we could look up the answers on the laptop if we wanted to. And the person would either go along with it or they wouldn't. And they would Google the answers to these trivia questions. Then afterwards, we separated the participant from their Confederate, and we had them interviewed by a professional examiner who was like basically an interrogator, a professional interrogator. And they tried to figure out who was lying and who was telling the truth, who had cheated, on the trivia game and who hadn't. Some of the study was done face to face, where the interrogator would meet with the person in the same room, and sometimes it was done through computer-mediated communication across a distance. They did it via video conference. And we had 3 different truth conditions. We had truth, where nobody cheated. We had what we called sanctioned lie, where we basically told them it was okay to look things up on the Google. And then we had unsanctioned lie, where we basically caught them cheating and told them they were bad people for trying to cheat on our trivia quiz. We had these 4 professional polygraph examiners provided by the Department of Defense of the United States, who had a lot of experience interrogating suspects about crimes. And they were sent into a room with these poor people who basically had to convince them that they hadn't cheated. And we had them rate the participants on various things. We divided the questions into a few different categories. So at the beginning, it was sort of a friendly chat. What is your understanding of the purpose of this interview? Have you ever played a trivia game like this before? How do you think you did? Was teamwork a factor? And then we started into the more serious questions. If I told you you did better than most groups, would that surprise you? Now, if you've cheated, you're going to be a little bit on edge and go, ooh, I don't know why I did better than most groups. Are you aware of the prohibition against cheating is in the university's honor code? If someone cheated in this experiment, what would happen to them? So those were sort of the suspicion questions. We called that sort of the category 2. Category 3 was direct questioning about cheating. Did you cheat? Is there any reason why someone would say you cheated? If they told you that your participation in the trivia game was video recorded, would that change your answers? So they were very sort of aggressive kind of questioning. So keep in mind those sort of 3 categories: very friendly at the beginning, a little bit more suspicion inducing in the middle, and then some very difficult cheating questions at the end. We use this program that's called CBAS to code those behaviors. So we use their nonverbal codes. That's what you can see there in the top right of the thing, all these different codes. We watched the video, and then every time we saw something, we hit a button, and they were coded according to what they had seen. And one of our important categories was what we called laughing along, that we had seen in the previous study with the desert survival groups. So one person laughs and the other person laughs along with what they're saying, even if there's nothing funny that's ever been said. Now, what you'll notice is in that first phase of the interview, when it's very friendly and we're just talking about what the task was, there were 49 instances of that. Much less in the second, where we start getting suspicious about cheating. And in the third, down to 9. The frequency dropped over time of this laughing along. The interviews got much less friendly over time. Most of the dyads, as opposed to the desert survival dyads, where 77% of them used laughing along, most of them in this study did not use laughing along, perhaps because of the seriousness of it, but they didn't use it as much, and we didn't see the same sex difference that we saw in the previous one. What we did see was a real interesting difference between people that were interviewed in the same room in the face-to-face situation versus the people that were interviewed over video conference. So if you teach a class over Zoom versus teaching a class in person, you're going to see a real difference between the way that people laugh along. You saw much less of it in the video conference modality versus the face-to-face modality. And we also saw a real difference between the type of person. So the truth condition is that blue line. That's the sort of control condition. Nobody's lying. But the real difference is between the people that were told it's okay to lie and the people that were told it's not okay to lie. You got caught and they got punished. That's unsanctioned lying condition. Those are the people that are going to really see a big difference over time. So the conclusions that we drew from these studies is that laughing along with your partner is frequently used as a strategy to signal synchrony and build rapport. that what you're trying to do with laughing along, even if there's nothing objectively funny, your partner says something and you go, ah, that's funny. Even if there's nothing funny, you're saying it because you're trying to sort of create a connection with them. You're trying to build synchrony and rapport. But what we found is that the context is very important. So in the desert survival task, there was a lot of laughing along. They were working on this problem together. They were part of a team. They were trying to figure it out. But when they were interrogated, when there was a very serious accusation of cheating, all of a sudden the laughing along disappeared. And so when the conversation turns serious, you're going to see laughing along go away. So we saw it as an intentional persuasion tactic, that in the desert survival task or in the deception task, we saw both times that they were basically trying to use laughing along as a way to build rapport and make themselves connected to the person that they were talking to. There might be some sex differences. We did see that in the one study, but not in the second study. And so there might be some sex differences where women maybe are using this more as kind of a rapport building, but I would love to see more studies on this because I'm not willing to sort of draw that conclusion just yet on the basis of just this data. So my next question is, since this is a pedagogy conference, how can we use this as a pedagogical tactic to really think about how you can use laughing along in your classroom? So most of the time when we're talking about humor in the classroom, we're talking about it from the perspective of the teacher, right? What types of humor is the teacher using, and how can they, make their class more engaging and connect with their students more? But I'm actually interested in this interplay between the teacher and the student. How can the teacher and the student connect with one another and use this as a pedagogical tactic? So if the teacher is throwing out jokes and the class is laughing, maybe the laughing along can be a way to sort of build rapport and connect one another and maybe make the class feel more cohesive instead of, being teacher versus student. We need to sort of connect this pedagogical strategy a little bit more. So I'd love to hear more about what other people have to say about this strategy. Like I said, most of my research is from the interpersonal point of view, because that's the kind of research that I do. But I think thinking about it in a public space like a classroom as a laughing along, as a synchrony strategy and creating rapport with your students is a really interesting application of it that I would love to hear more about. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up to see if other people have questions about it.
Any questions from the audience, please? Actually, okay.
Okay, thank you. So this is a very impressive presentation. I'm Michelle from CHK. So because based on the previous talk from other keynote speakers, it's just like laughing can be a very important factor that for the teachers to evaluate whether our humors or our joke would be relevant or is it a kind of accurate joke. But then for applying the laughing along skills in our teaching, so do we need to evaluate or do we need to keep a note on what would be the intention of the laughing? Just like just what you mentioned, maybe some of the students, they think my joke would be quite funny to them, so they just laugh. Or maybe some joke, maybe they are a very serious person and then they not feeling that it's so funny, but then maybe the students sit next to them would be keep laughing and laughing, then maybe they just keep a kind of respond to this. So as a teacher standing outside on the stage, so do I need to kind of be focused or concentrate what kind of intention that they would laugh? Is this kind of the skills that you promote? Thank you.
I think that's a great question because I think you pick up on a couple of different things. I'm hearing in your question some ideas of like emotional contagion. So even if I'm not feeling particularly, humorous, if everybody else is laughing, I'm going to laugh too. Right. And so there's sort of this like group dynamic that happens in a classroom that's different from the interpersonal settings that I typically study. And so the emotional contagion of the laughter might kind of bring people along and help people. But I also think like another thing that you're picking up on is it's not just about what the professor is doing. It's a lot of pedagogical research is on like what are the humor styles of the professor and what can they do in order to create more engagement in their classroom. But I actually think the students play just as important a role. I think synchrony between the professor and the students is a two-way street. And so the students have to play a very important role in trying to figure out how they can sort of create this dynamic in their classroom that will encourage more questions, encourage more engagement. And so the more that students feel like they have an agency in that is really important.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Dr. Dunbar. My name is John Banas. You might remember me from such universities as University of Oklahoma. But I
love you, John Banas.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you. There's a neuroscientist turned field researcher named Robert Provine, and he actually talks about laughing along and how it is rarely triggered by legitimate joke work.
Exactly.
But it's purely speculative. And so when we read that in class, I cite your research because my students absolutely say, yeah, I do this. I say goodbye to my friends, like just before class. I said, see you at home. And we both laughed. And they're like, explain this to me. And I'm like, well, I think Dr. Dunbar actually has the best explanation because it's just bonding. It's just, these are two people who like each other. And so one of the things I was thinking about your scholarship, the very first day, I try to get us laughing along, right? To just create that, hey, we're trying to create this thing together. And anyways, I just wanted to say that, I know we did that study years ago, but I still talk about it in my classes. And so thank you.
That's great. I actually 100% agree that a lot of the laughter in interpersonal communication is not objectively funny. There's like no joke there. There's nothing that you're saying that anybody would like say, well, that was a joke. A lot of it is just sort of laughter to kind of create bonding. I was teaching my class today in nonverbal communication at UCSB. And I showed this video from John Cleese where he goes to India and he joins what is called a laughing club in India. They literally, it's from an old BBC show called The Human Face, where they're talking about laughter as contagion. And in the laughing club that he visits in India, they literally just look at each other and make funny faces and laugh. There's like no kind of external stimulus that would cause the laughter, but just seeing a person laughing makes you laugh too. And so there's that emotional contagion I was talking about earlier. It's just about bonding, about rapport, even if there's nothing sort of objectively funny going on at all.
Any other questions from the audience? Actually, if not, I do have questions. So
go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, both you and Professor Banas and have talked about this point about, you don't need a joke for this sort of laughing along. And in fact, Professor Banas just said that, having a joke before this actually doesn't really work, right? It's almost like feel like if I let's say if I'm the teacher, right, I go and have a joke and then I just laugh it off myself, right? That doesn't actually make the audience laugh together. It doesn't really work that way. But on the other hand, if I walk in the classroom with a cheerful smile and maybe a little bit of giggle, right? Maybe actually that's a positive influence to the students' emotions that way, and would be a lot more effective. So that's actually very interesting on the sense that maybe this is a very different strategy that is not rely, you just can't, it's completely independent from making jokes, right? It only works well when there's no joke. But then it comes to my second question, right? Would be, in the past, we always see sitcoms on TV, right? And then every time when something supposed to be funny happens, and then there will be that background noise,
The
and
laugh track.
right. So that's supposed to, I have a feeling that's supposed to be the laughing along effects, but
Mhm.
I'm not so sure now, right? Is that really working, or is that really not working? We just talked about this, right? If there's something supposed to be funny, right, happened, and then you have this, right, laughing along, trying to get this to work, is that really effective, or is that not effective? If it is not effective, is it because what? Is it because that, that's the teacher on the stage, if he or she is trying to do a joke intentionally and then trying to laugh it off himself or herself, it's a kind of insincerity? Maybe the students feel it that way. Maybe it has something to do with the sincerity, right? If I just walk into
Yes.
that room and actually be joyful, it's actually infectious that way. So that's the question I have here, right? Is the sitcom wrong, or is it because it's a different context that it's actually not wrong? It's just another way that it actually works, right?
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, in the classroom, what is it be? Is it really based on some sort of sincerity for this laughing along to work? That's my question right here. Yeah.
I think you're right that the context makes a big difference. The laugh track works in the sitcom because these are like jokes that are supposed to be funny. But if I went to class and I had like a laugh track playing for my jokes, I don't think it would go over with my students because it would come off as insincere. And so I think that the laughing along that I've been seeing in my interpersonal research, it works because it seems genuine to them, because it feels like they are actually, building this connection with this person. And so I think in the classroom, if you have a professor that tells a joke and the class laughs and they laugh, or maybe the professor just starts laughing and other people laugh too, even if there's nothing objectively funny, I think that the context, I think you're exactly right, that the context makes a big difference, and that a laugh track would not work in the classroom, but it laughing along does work because it creates that rapport and connection with other people.
Oh, now that you reminded me, actually, I think there was at least one incident that I made a joke myself, but I just couldn't hold it. I just laughed it off myself, and I just kept laughing and laughing. I couldn't stop at all. It's just really weird. But turns out the class just followed afterwards. Maybe that laugh was just a sincere laugh I did.
Yes.
Maybe.
I have told jokes in class that have failed, and they don't laugh at all my jokes. But if I start laughing, then they'll laugh anyway, even if my joke was terrible. It's like the laughter is infectious, not the joke. It doesn't really matter if the joke is funny, but the laughter is what's infectious.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dunbar. Are there any questions on you? Okay. We don't have any questions on the. Oh, sorry. Oh no, this chat box here. I don't think that's a question. No, that's not a question. Yeah, don't worry. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, we do have one more question. Yep. Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm Ben again. So I think we know that humor is used intentionally as a persuasive tactic. Like laughing along will be, from what you said, it will be kind of a group identity building, and then getting rapport and thing. And I'm particularly intrigued, by the information about classroom dynamic synchronization. So you identify like student to student, teacher to student on different occasions. I wonder if we can actually think about we structure some kind of like activities in the classroom where we condition repeatedly do some kind of experiments to kind of prep them into like this kind of a laughing along mode, and then in building that kind of rapport, if it is successful.
So tell me your question.
Yes, I guess this is just new knowledge to me, so I haven't made myself understood in that case. I'm thinking about like from the flow, like in the classroom, there's kind of rhythm, the different parts, of the activities. And in that context, we identify some objective or some activities, what we want to achieve, right? Because we have multiple objectives to achieve in the class. So I was thinking about in those kind of activities, kind of learning activities, we can instill structurally, regularly, some kind of elements that can instill that kind of laughing along elements. Like either maybe by jokes or maybe by materials or maybe by some kind of people will expect it, and then they will know how to laugh. If they laugh a lot, then that means that hopefully we can see whether this is actually really helping building with a group identity.
So the expectedness is what you're thinking
Yeah,
about?
I think.
Yeah. So when things happen that are unexpected, maybe they're like triggering of more humor as opposed to things that people expect because it's kind of like the unusual is interesting and funny.
I think it's part of it. Expectedness, will be helping them to, for those people who don't find it funny, then they can laugh along and they know when to laugh. But at the same time, it's like moving, making the identity of the diverse identity closer because they have more occasions to laugh together. For example, they normally will not laugh together. Like, for example, different identity groups, different power relationship. But then if we deliberately create occasions that they laugh a lot more, then they become, more. I'm not quite sure if they still identify themselves with the other groups, but at least, if it could be an experiment to see whether this will do any magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have any data on this, but I think it's a really interesting hypothesis about like the expectedness of the humor and I think it relates to what I was saying earlier about the context that like when I found that when people were trying to solve this desert survival problem together, there was a lot of laughing along, like 77%. When they were being interrogated about cheating, very little, and it dropped off dramatically from sort of the friendly part of the conversation to the more serious interrogation. So the context really makes a big difference. And so, and what you're questioning about, what you're talking about, the discussion topic makes a big difference. And that's going to relate well to the classroom where, the classroom might have times, I heard the previous speaker talking a lot about the appropriateness of the humor and talking about, what is the context that really relates. I think that all those things are really important and we could use a lot more research, I think, in that area.
Thank you very much, Professor Dunbar.